Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
Welcome to Let the Quran Speak. My name is Sophia, I'm your host. The aim of Let the Quran Speak is to help you gain deeper insights into Muslims and Islam, as it is practiced here and in other parts of the world. The Quran is the central text in the Islamic tradition, and Muslims claim it is of divine origin. But if that is so, then the Quran really should be taken seriously. How can we be certain that a book written more than 1400 years ago comes from God? With me to discuss the authority of the Quran, Dr. Shabir Ali, President of the Islamic Information Center. Brother Shabir, as I mentioned, the Quran was written so long ago. We tend not to trust things in this age. We tend to be skeptical. So how can we be sure that the Quran comes from God?
Well, when we say that the book comes from God, we need to put that in perspective and think about what we mean by saying that a book comes from God, and what has this meant to people over time. In the Hebrew scriptures, we have several prophets saying the word of the Lord came to me. So there is a sense in which a prophet is inspired by some message from God, which he then feels inclined to deliver to people. The New Testament Gospels are thought to be written under divine inspiration. Even though on the surface these appear to be ordinary biographies of the prophet Jesus. But a belief emerges that the writers wrote under some sort of divine inspiration. In a similar way, Muslims came to believe that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was a recipient of divine revelation. The word of the Lord did come to him. And what he recited under this divine inspiration, that specifically was collected into what we have as the Quran today. So that the Quran is not a simple biography of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. No, other writings were compiled, real biographies of the Prophet, detailing his life from birth to death. But the Quran is a series of orations, material that was spoken on a variety of occasions, dealing with this wide variety of issues as they arose. And those orations were later on compiled. And those orations Muslims believe to be the divine inspiration given to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So, according to Muslim belief, the Quran is not the speech of Muhammad himself. This is originating from God. It is God's speech delivered to the Prophet Muhammad, which he was then simply made the conduit for, so that God's speech now reaches us. Now that's the basic belief.
So how would you respond to someone who says, well, are you sure it actually comes from God, or it wasn't something made up by the Prophet Muhammad himself?
Yes, indeed, this was your original question, and what I've said is just preamble to lead now.
Useful preamble.
Yes. There are several reasons for thinking that Muhammad is not the author of this book. One is that the Prophet Muhammad, according to Muslim belief, was unlettered, and the Quran seems to confirm this, saying that he did not read a book prior to this, he did not write this with his right hand. So even if he wanted to write a book, he was not a composer, he couldn't do it himself. Second, a psychological examination here would show that this is not Muhammad's own work, because the Quran speaks to Muhammad and addresses him, commands him, tells him what to do, and on occasion even criticizes some of his behavior. So if he were writing the book on his own, it would be very strange that he's writing a book and criticizing himself and addressing himself, commanding himself. Third, the Quran speaks about past history, telling us about things that were not known to Muhammad and his contemporaries.
Can you give us an example of that?
For example, in describing the previous prophets, like Noah, for example, the Quran says, this is information from the unseen that we reveal unto you. Neither you nor your contemporaries knew about this. Information about Mary, the mother of Jesus.
So this wouldn't have been known to the people at the time?
Some very specific information, like for example, Dr. Maurice Bouquet in his book The Bible, the Quran and Science spoke about the perishing of the Pharaoh in the sea. Well, from the biblical records, all we know is that Pharaoh just perished there in the sea, and that's the end of him. But the Quran in the 10th surah, in the 92nd verse, says, "This day we preserve you in terms of your body, so that you may be a sign for those who come later." According to Dr. Maurice Bouquet, as detailed in his book, the body of the Pharaoh was in fact subsequently discovered, and it has become a sign for those who come later, namely us. The discovery was in 1898 and first documented in a book by Sir Elliot Smith, The Royal Mummies, published in 1912. So the Quran, some more than 1,000 years before that, said that the body of the Pharaoh was preserved, even though we had no other record of it except the Quran's indication.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned historical references. What about future references? Does the Quran make reference to anything in the future that the Prophet Muhammad could not possibly have known?
Yes, several times the Quran speaks about things that will happen in the future, things in the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in the preservation of the Quran itself and what will happen to this book, the development and progress of the Muslim community. At a time when everything looked bleak, the Quran was promising success. And from a human point of view, biographers of the Prophet Muhammad, modern biographers, Orientalist non-Muslim scholars, looking at this, think that no one could have expected the mission of Islam to be successful, but the Quran kept insisting that this will happen, and in fact it did happen. Sometimes some specific sort of prophecy is given. For example, when the Romans were defeated, it looked like that was the end of the Romans at the time. But the Quran in the 30th chapter, named Surah Ar-Rum, the chapter of the Romans, spoke about an eventual victory of the Romans after all of this defeat, and says that at that time the believers will delight at the victory which will come from God. Well, it so turns out that within a few years, as the Quran seemed to have predicted, not only did the Romans turn around and win a smashing victory against the Persians once again, but at about the same time, the Muslims were involved in what is referred to as the Battle of Badr, which was a milestone in Muslim history. That really was the moment when Muslims saw the glory of God and the help of the angels with them in battle.
Mm-hmm. Some Muslims have made reference to things mentioned in the Quran that were later confirmed by science. Do you hold to that view as well?
Yes, there are things which are mentioned in the Quran in the simple language that would have been understood by the Arabs at the time in a very basic way. And now with modern scientific insight, we understand these passages in a deeper way. And in a way that, in fact, correspond to some of our more recent scientific discoveries. Take, for example, in the 51st chapter of the Quran, in the 47th verse, it says, "As for the heavens, we created it with power, and we are expanding it." The classical commentators on this, though they understood Arabic more than we do, could only say, well, God is expanding it by putting more provisions into it. But nowadays we know that God is expanding it in a real sense, because the universe is thought to have popped into existence from a big bang that occurred some almost 14 billion years ago, and that it has been expanding ever since. So the idea that the universe is expanding is a very modern one. In fact, this could not have been known or discovered prior to the use of the Hubble telescopes, which became available in the 1930s, when it was seen that the stars and galaxies are moving away from each other at a rapid speed. And that confirmed that the universe is expanding. In fact, the idea was proposed in the 1930s due to this observation, and could only be confirmed in 1964 when two scientists, Penzias and Wilson, won the Nobel Prize for their discovery of what is referred to as cosmic microwave background radiation. That would have been the radiation that was emitted at the moment of the Big Bang, some 14 billion years ago. And the Big Bang theory of the origin of the universe also entails the expansion of the universe from that singularity.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other arguments that you find convincing for why one should believe that the Quran is from God?
Yes, one of the recent sorts of study that have been done on the Quran is the observation of the numerical correspondence of things in the Quran. And there are several such. We wouldn't have time in a short show such as this one to detail all of them. But the alignment of chapter numbers, verse numbers, the number of words that are used to formulate certain basic expressions in the Quran, the number of letters that are sometimes used to express a certain basic idea. All of these are now found to have deep significance, meaningful arrangements. Such that the number of words, for example, let me give you an example so it doesn't sound too theoretical.
Yeah, helpful, yeah.
The Quran says that the example of Jesus in the sight of God is like Adam, because God created Adam from clay and then said to him, be, and he was.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea here is that God created both Jesus and Adam. And this is the Muslim viewpoint regarding Jesus, that he's a servant and messenger, the Messiah of God, but still one of God's creatures.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's the message of the Quran, and it's done there. That's how it has been interpreted for 1400 years. But now, armed with our computer systems, making it easy for us to check the number of times words are used in the Quran, one finds that the word Jesus, Isa in Arabic, occurs 25 times in the Quran, and the word Adam also occurs 25 times. So not only is God saying that Jesus is like Adam to him, but both Jesus and Adam are mentioned in the Quran exactly 25 times each. Now, that number is not coincidental. In a similar vein, we can mention that the word for month in the singular occurs in the Quran just 12 times, which is an interesting number when we speak of months. The word day in the singular, yawm in Arabic, without any suffixes, occurs in the Quran exactly 365 times. And that too cannot be said to be by coincidence. Otherwise, we'd have too many coincidences like this occurring one after another in the Quran.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Thank you for your time, Brother Shakir.
You're welcome.
We'll take a break. When we return, was the Quran changed?